So Warfare was directed by Ray Mendoza and Alex Garland, and it stars DeFaro Wanate, Will Poulter, Cosmo Jarvis, Kit Connor, Joseph Quinn, Charles Melton, Noah Centineo, Michael Gandolfini. And in this movie, it's based off Ray Mendoza's account from when he was in the Iraq War, particularly on this mission he was in 2006. And basically, the events that took place during this mission and every aspect of this movie is based on testimony from Mendoza himself, as well as the people that are portrayed in this movie. This was a movie I was interested in mainly because of A24 at first. A24, I talk about A24 a lot on this channel, but they're one of my favorite studios working today because every time they release a new movie, it's always fascinating. And in fact, 10 years ago was the first time I saw an A24 movie, Ex Machina, directed by Alex Garland. And he was heavily involved in this movie. He directed this movie along with Ray Mendoza, and I was definitely curious to see what this movie was going to be like. It was definitely kind of interested in the whole aspect that this is based off a real account. One of the co-directors is actually associated with the event, and he was a veteran in this war and such. So I was very curious to see what this movie was like. And this movie is really well done. This movie has a lot of great performances. It has great atmosphere, and it definitely made me think a lot about various aspects and like what they were kind of trying to say in this movie. So let's start off with the acting. A lot of the actors do a fantastic job in this movie, particularly the ones I want to give a shout out to are particularly DeFaro Wanate. He plays Ray Mendoza in this movie. He was fantastic in this movie. Will Poulter, also good. Cosmo Jarvis was also really good. Joseph Quinn, Charles Melton. Everyone in this movie does a fantastic job. They do enough with the characters where, admittedly, I think the characters themselves are not very fleshed out, but then again, this movie is just an account of what happened and it's all in real time. So I guess I kind of let that slide, but you do get a sense of what these characters are like when they're in the battlefields and such is definitely very interesting. The atmosphere itself is incredibly intense. This movie is basically. So I heard some people say, "Oh, it's basically like the opening scene of Saving Private Ryan, but for the entire runtime." And I can definitely see that. I also kind of remind myself of Dunkirk a little bit, how that movie basically was, at times various sequences that were playing out. And I definitely feel like the atmosphere itself is very intense. There's not a moment where you're thinking, I feel safe now. I mean, there are a couple moments where you do feel safe. You think something's about to happen, but then it doesn't. So you kind of feel safe for a bit, and then all of a sudden it just hits you. And that is very well done. I do think that movie, I feel like Warfare does that really well, where it's like kind of makes you feel like you're definitely in this war zone and you kind of feel like at one point nothing bad's going to happen, but then all of a sudden a lot of the bad stuff just comes out of nowhere. That is very interesting. This movie is very surprising, very intense, very heartbreaking at times, and also I do think a lot of the themes themselves are very interesting. How all these guys go into this war and such, and how they were kind of like were all mostly young guys who were kind of going in and kind of like still kind of learning about themselves a little bit, and then all of a sudden they kind of just realize that they're really involved in some really dark stuff and really involved with a lot of the stuff that's happening in this war and such. I do think that the idea of them being like, being afraid but still kind of putting on like, a strong face. We've seen that in war movies before, but I think this is one of the ones that's done effectively well. And also, I do like this theme where it's like there's a little subplot in this movie too where it involves a family who's kind of caught up in the whole ordeal, which I thought was very fascinating as well. And it's like all these guys who are soldiers and such, they're all afraid too, but this family is also afraid and they're kind of being held hostage for a while. And it's like this family sees these soldiers as monsters, but the soldiers themselves see all these other people as monsters, and I felt that was very interesting and very well handled. I definitely think this is one of those movies that is going to have a lot of conversations. That is, if people see this movie. Unfortunately, it made like $8 million at the box office, and I feel like it deserves to make more. So, is there anything about this movie that I didn't really care for? Well, I do feel like that again, the characters themselves, they are not really the most well-written characters. I compared it to Dunkirk in a way where it's like my main gripe about that movie was most of the characters in that movie were not very well defined. They were just people who were caught up in a situation. And that can kind of be said about this movie too. But the actors themselves do a fantastic job of at least kind of like making you care about these characters, making you fearful when they get into a harmful situation, and actually like actually care about them as people rather than just saying, oh yeah, they're just disposable characters. But again, these are real people. The names have been changed for various reasons and such, but these were still real people who were involved in this. And also, this may be a nitpick if I'm being honest, but if this is like one of my biggest issues, then I really don't see it as like that big of a problem. I don't know why, but the credits reminded me of Jarhead a little too much, which I know that's about a different war and such, but the credits themselves kind of remind me a little bit of Jarhead. Obviously, this movie's very different from it, but it's like, okay, maybe you could have done the credits a little bit differently, but other than that, it was definitely a movie worth watching. So Warfare, the actors in this movie do a fantastic job. Pretty much, DeFaro Wanate, Will Poulter, Cosmo Jarvis, Joseph Quinn, Charles Melton. A lot of people in this movie do a fantastic job. The intense atmosphere is incredible. The sound design alone is just catches you off guard a lot. The idea that you feel safe and then you realize you're not, I feel like that was very well done. It is very surprising. The themes are very well done and very well handled and such. Now, I would argue that the characters themselves are very thin, and I kind of argued that the credits themselves kind of borrowed heavily from another movie. I definitely think this movie is definitely worth watching. I'll give Warfare 3.5 out of 4 stars. See it. So, what was your favorite war movie? Comment down below, subscribe to the channel. This is Pat. Stay safe.